It's 7 o'clock, and that means that 8 states are scheduled to close their polls at this time. Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Virginia. And we already have 3 projections. We project that the states of Indiana and Kentucky will go for Donald Trump. No surprise there. And the state of Vermont will go for Joe Biden. No surprise there. In addition, Florida, Georgia, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Virginia have also all closed their doors. We're a little surprised about the projections we're getting in from South Carolina and Virginia. South Carolina we thought would be a slam dunk for Trump, but so far it looks like a rather close race between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley, with Joe Biden coming in third. No one was really expecting that. And in Virginia, we have a very tight 3-way race between Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and Nikki Haley. Again, a surprise. Virginia was thought to be probably leaning Biden, but it looks like that's not what's happening, so we're going to have to wait on those. So at the moment, Joe Biden has 3 electoral votes on the board. Donald Trump has 19 electoral votes on the board. And there have been no surprises so far. At the bottom of the hour, 3 more states will close their doors: North Carolina, Ohio, and West Virginia. North Carolina is being contested by all 3 candidates, actually. Ohio is generally believed to be probably safe for Donald Trump, but both Biden and Haley do have a token presence there. And West Virginia is expected to go easily for Trump. But for now, that's where we are in terms of the states have closed and in terms of those states that we have now projected winners in. Jake, back to you. At the bottom of the hour, we have the closing from 3 states: North Carolina, Ohio, and West Virginia. And right now, we can project that the state of West Virginia will go for Donald Trump. That's not a surprise. So that shows Donald Trump now on the board with 23 electoral votes. Joe Biden has 3 electoral votes. The other 2 states that just closed, North Carolina and Ohio, we're not ready to project those yet, but we can say that in Ohio, Donald Trump currently is leading, and in North Carolina, it looks like we're seeing a tight 3-way race between Biden, Haley, and Trump. But so far, has to be said, we are not seeing any surprises. And in general, so far, the states that Donald Trump has won, we expected him to win. The states that Joe Biden has won, we expected him to win. So back to you, Jake, until 8 o'clock, when we will have a much larger collection of states that expect to close their doors. We have, let's see, 4, 8, 12... Now, there'll be 15 states that will close their doors, and we expect that in many cases we will have projections as soon as they close. So back to you, Jake, for now, but at 8 o'clock we expect the pace of these election results to start coming in a lot more quickly. Back to you, Jake. At 8 o'clock Eastern, we now have a whole collection of states, 15 in all, that just closed their doors, and we do have a lot of projections. We project that Alabama will go for Donald Trump. Connecticut will go for Joe Biden. Delaware also for Joe Biden. D.C. for Joe Biden. D.C. hasn't voted for anyone but the Democratic candidate ever. Illinois will go to Joe Biden. Maryland to Joe Biden. Massachusetts for Joe Biden. Mississippi, we project, will go for Trump. Missouri will go for Trump. New Jersey for Joe Biden. Oklahoma for Trump. Rhode Island for Joe Biden. And Tennessee for Donald Trump. Now, there are 2 states which we can't yet project. One is not a surprise. That is the swing state of Pennsylvania. We always knew Pennsylvania was going to be a fight, and it is. We see a tight three-way race at the moment between Nikki Haley, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump. That probably we won't be able to call for a while. The big surprise, the state of Maine. Maine is normally safe for Joe Biden, but as you can see, Donald Trump is coming very close in Maine, so we don't actually know where that's going to end up at the moment, and that is a bit of a surprise. So let's see where we're at in the overall count so far. So far, there are 74 electoral votes for Joe Biden on the board. There are 66 electoral votes for Donald Trump so far on the board. None of those electoral votes are a surprise on either side. So for now, nothing has really changed. We're still waiting for the really important states to report in, and we're still waiting for the really important projections to tell us the real story of what's going on today. So for now, back to you, Jake, until 8:30. At that time, we'll probably start getting results from the state of Arkansas, which closes its polls at that time. We don't expect any great surprise there. That state will almost certainly go for Donald Trump. Back to you, Jake. Well, it is 8:30. We do have results coming in now from the state of Arkansas, and we are now ready to project that the state of Arkansas will go for Donald Trump. So Donald Trump now has 72 electoral votes on the board. Joe Biden has 74. But we also have a projection. We have a projection in the state of Ohio. We had originally characterized the race as too early to call, not necessarily too close to call, but too early to call. But we are now ready to call the state of Ohio for Donald Trump. So that is the first large state so far that has been won by Donald Trump. Previously, Joe Biden had won the state of Illinois. So they both have a largish state now in their column, but neither of those states were considered swing states, so that's not a surprise. So we now have 74 electoral votes on the board for Joe Biden. We have 89 electoral votes for Donald Trump. Coming up at the top of the hour, let's see, we have a bunch of states. 10. We have 16 states that will be closing their doors at 9 o'clock, including the important swing states of Arizona, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And we are still waiting for projections on Florida and Maine. So we expect the action will probably pick up fairly rapidly in the wake of those poll closings, and we do hope to have more projections for you coming up at the top of the hour. For now, back to you, Jake. We are at the top of the hour, and 14 states just closed their doors, and we do have some projections now. We are projecting now that Kansas, Louisiana, Nebraska, and Texas, and Wyoming will all go for Donald Trump. So let's see. There's one footnote on that. We do not yet have a projection for the 2nd Congressional District in Nebraska. Nebraska is a little different from the other states. It shares the lonely distinction with Maine of being one of the only 2 states that don't award winner-take-all, but that also award by congressional district. And Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District is heavily urban. Omaha is at its center, and it often goes for the Democrat. It often doesn't follow the lead of the rest of the state. So we're not ready to project that yet, so we're going to leave that in the toss-up column for now. On the Democratic side, we're now ready to project the state of New York. We'll go for Joe Biden. That's no surprise. So at the moment, we're seeing Joe Biden with 102 electoral votes and Donald Trump with 150 electoral votes. None of those states are surprises. Those basically are ending up right about where we expected them to be. So far there are no surprises. So far it's perfectly plausible for either Joe Biden or Donald Trump to win this race. They both have easy, clear paths to a win at this time, and no paths have been foreclosed. We are not yet able to project a few states, about a half a dozen states that just closed their doors, including 3 very important swing states, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin. You can see those are preliminary returns there. And as you can see in all 3 of those states, we're seeing a tight 3-way race between Joe Biden, Nikki Haley, and Donald Trump. So We're not ready to call any of those races now. We consider all of them to be too close to call. Colorado is too early to call. Iowa is too early to call. And Minnesota and New Mexico also, and South Dakota, they're all too early to call. South Dakota is a little bit of a surprise, too. South Dakota normally is a slam dunk for the Republican candidate, but as you can see at the moment, Donald Trump is leading, but Nikki Haley is close on his heels, so surprisingly, we're not ready to call that state either. So that's where we're at now, and we're still waiting for projections on the state of Florida and on the state of Maine. So that's where matters stand at the moment. We'll be back as soon as we have any further projections. In the meantime, back to you, Jake. I've got to interrupt you now. CNN does have a projection for that. Let's go to John King on the board now. John, what do you got? John, at this time, we are ready to call the state of Maine for Joe Biden. Donald Trump gave Joe Biden a fairly surprising run for his money, and we were not able to project Maine as quickly as we expected to be able to, but we do now see it is for Joe Biden, with one exception, Maine CD2, the 2nd Congressional District. We mentioned earlier that Maine and Nebraska are the only two states which don't apportion all their electors on a winner-take-all basis. They also apportion by congressional district. And Maine's 2nd Congressional District is notably more conservative than the rest of the state. And at the moment, the results from the counties in that district show a very tight race. So we're not ready to call that particular elector, but we think the rest of the state of Maine will go for Joe Biden. So at this time, we now see Joe Biden with 105 electoral votes on the board, Donald Trump with 150 electoral votes. And we don't see any surprises in any of those results so far. So both candidates still have a clear path to a victory, and both are still in the hunt. And with that, back to you, Jake. I've got to interrupt you now because we have to go back to John King at the board. He's got a very important and surprising projection. John, what did you have for us? Jake, this is surprising, and this is quite a headline. We project, when all the votes are in, that the state of Florida will be won by former South Carolina Governor and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. We've been watching the state of Florida very closely all night. It's been a tight three-way race between Biden, Trump, and Haley. And this is an important result because, for one thing, this is the first time that an independent or third-party presidential candidate has won a state in a presidential election since George Wallace in 1967. So it's almost 60 years ago that the last independent third-party presidential candidate won a state. In addition, with that loss, we've got projected maps here for a Trump victory and a Biden victory. And both Biden and Trump figured on Trump winning the state of Florida. So if Biden loses the state of Florida, that's no major loss for Biden. On the other hand, it is a major loss for Donald Trump because with Nikki Haley winning the state of Florida, that means that Donald Trump now has to basically run the board. He has to run an inside straight. He's got to win every single other of the swing states. He's now barely 17 votes above the magic 270 mark. So this has certainly put a crimp in Donald Trump's style. At the same time, he can still win this, and Joe Biden definitely can still win this because Florida was never in his game plan anyway. But it has to be a surprise. We do now have, for the first time since 1968, we have a candidate who's won a state's electoral votes in a presidential election. John, does this have larger implications? If Nikki Haley won in Florida, are there other states where she seems to be doing surprisingly well and where she appears to be competitive? Yeah. In fact, she's competitive in a number of states at the moment. She's competitive in Georgia. She's competitive in New Hampshire. She's competitive in South Carolina, which is quite a surprise. She's competitive in Virginia. She's competitive in North Carolina. And let's see, she's competitive in Pennsylvania. She's competitive in Arizona. She's competitive in Iowa. She's competitive in Michigan. She's competitive and she's competitive in South Dakota and in Wisconsin. So she's doing very well. She's coming close, but no cigar so far until, of course, the state of Florida, which is a major loss for Donald Trump. It won't give Nikki Haley the presidency, but it will make Donald Trump's path to victory somewhat harder as a result. He can still win. He can still win, but the loss of Florida does hurt him a bit. Thanks, John. Let me go back to my panel and see what we think about this. It's the top of the hour. Let's go to John King at the board. John, what's happening at this hour? At this hour, we have 3 states that are closing their doors: Montana, Nevada, and Utah. Montana, we were expecting to be able to call. We cannot. Montana is too close to call, and that's a surprise. Nevada, we expected that. That's a swing state. It was heavily fought over, so we think it's too close to call. We're not calling that. Utah is an easy call. We're calling that right now for Donald Trump. So Donald Trump gets Utah's 6 electoral votes. So he now has 156 electoral votes on the board. Joe Biden has 105. And Nikki Haley has a total of 30 electoral votes. And we're still waiting for projections on a whole bunch of important states, including Georgia and Virginia, both of which we hope to have coming up in the next 30 to 40 minutes or so. Thanks, John. Let's get back to our panel. Let's break in now. We have some more projections. Let's go to John King on the board. John? Yes, Jake, we have 2 states, both of which we're projecting will go into the Biden column. Colorado's 10 electoral votes will go for Joe Biden. New Mexico's 5 electoral votes will go for Joe Biden. And we're now projecting that the lone 2nd congressional district in Maine, which is often a swing district, we project that that will go for Donald Trump. So at this time, we're seeing Joe Biden with 120 electoral votes. We're seeing Donald Trump with 157 electoral votes. And Nikki Haley with a total of 30 electoral votes due to her unexpected victory in the state of Florida. And none of these victories, with the exception of Florida, were a particular surprise. So at this point, both candidates, both Joe Biden and Donald Trump, do still have a path to victory. Donald Trump's path to victory was a little complicated by the loss of Florida, but he can still get there. He can still make it. We're still waiting on projections from Georgia and New Hampshire and Virginia. And at this time, I'm also told we have another projection. We are now projecting that the state of Minnesota will also go. State of Minnesota will go to Joe Biden. So that now gives him 130 electoral votes. Donald Trump has 157 electoral votes, and Nikki Haley has 30 electoral votes. And we're still waiting on projections for the important states of Georgia and New Hampshire and Virginia. So hopefully, we hope to get those, hopefully in the next maybe 20, 30 minutes or so. Back to you, Jake, with the panel. I've got to break in now. John King has 2 very important projections. Let's go to John King and the board. John, what do you got for us? Jake, this is history. This is history in the making. We are now calling 2 swing states, and we're not calling either of them for either Joe Biden or Donald Trump. We are calling them for Nikki Haley. Right now, Nikki Haley is on her way to possibly being the first, one of the most successful independent third-party presidential candidates we've seen since George Wallace in 1968. We are calling the states of Georgia and the state of New Hampshire. We're calling both of those for Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley wins those 2 states, and with that, she now goes up to 50 electoral votes. Now, all along, we've been keeping tabs of what I call our Biden map and our Trump map. Biden's realistic victory map shows a count of 303 for Joe Biden, 235 for Donald Trump. On the other hand, Donald Trump's realistic victory map with the loss to Florida shows him winning with 287 electoral votes to Joe Biden's 221. Since Georgia and New Hampshire are both now off the table, we need to take both of those away from Donald Trump, which means that, we also need to take both of those away from Joe Biden. So if we take those away from Joe Biden as well, Joe Biden can still win. Joe Biden still has a path to victory. As you can see, he's still at 283, too close for comfort. He would like to have won New Hampshire. He would have liked to have won Georgia, but he can still do it. He can still make it. On the other hand, Donald Trump is now in serious trouble. He's below the magic marker. He's at 267. So right now, we're thinking about where can he flip. He needs to flip a Biden state. Are there any Biden states where realistically at this point he might be able to flip it? Let's go to our map and let's just see. Is there a Biden state here that he might be able to flip? He might get Nebraska 1, but of course that's only one electoral vote. And he needs 3. He needs at least 3 electoral votes. Iowa was already in his column. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Virginia was not in his column. So, at this point, in order for Donald Trump to have a chance, he probably needs to win Virginia. Virginia is probably the state where he has the best shot at the moment of winning. So, for now, on our Trump map, let's assume that instead of winning Georgia, he wins Virginia. So let's give him Virginia, and let's see. I think that does it for him. Yeah, that would give him the 280, and that would enable him to win. But Virginia is about the only state now that might give him the victory, and the odds are against that because most people believe Virginia is going to be a Biden state. But it is close. Glenn Youngkin won the governorship. Republican Glenn Youngkin won the governorship in 2021. It's still considered technically a swing state, even though it leans blue, so it's more purplish than reddish. But that's at this point Donald Trump's presidential hopes are hanging by a thread. It has to be said, because without Virginia, he probably can't win this election. But we have to say that the big news at the moment is Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley has now won 3 of the swing states. She's won Florida, she's won Georgia, she's won New Hampshire, and she's now up to 50 electoral votes. Not enough to win the presidency, not anywhere near enough, but it may have been enough to prevent Donald Trump from winning the presidency, and she may have just handed the election to Joe Biden, but we shall see. For now, that's where... John, just a moment. Let me ask you something. Right now, we're seeing Nikki Haley win in Florida, win in Georgia, and win in New Hampshire. Right now, where are the states where Nikki Haley's competitive? Where is she putting up a fight? Let's see. She's putting up a fight in South Carolina. She's putting up a fight in Virginia. She's putting up a fight in North Carolina. So that's South Carolina, Virginia, and North Carolina. See, is there any other? Oh, and Pennsylvania. She's putting up quite a fight in Pennsylvania. In fact, Pennsylvania is the closest to them all. So right now there's South Carolina, Virginia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. So there are those 4 states, 4 swing states. I'm sorry. There are now 6 swing states. There's Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, there's Arizona, there's South Carolina, and there's Virginia and North Carolina. All of those states, she's putting up quite a battle, and as you can see, it's a really tight 3-way race for all of those. She's being very competitive, and at this point, any of those states could be won by any of these candidates. This is turning into a big drama, Jake. This is turning into a big drama. We're looking at the first competitive independent third-party candidate since George Wallace in 1968. And she doesn't seem on her way to win the Electoral College, but she does seem on the way to possibly destroying Donald Trump's hopes for the presidency. And at this point, Joe Biden, with 283 electoral votes in the most likely winning scenario, has to be said that Joe Biden is barely staying there as well. And so Nikki Haley is threatening. There's no doubt about it. Nikki Haley is surging. Thank you, John. Let's go back to my panel and let's discuss this. I'm going to interrupt you again. John King has another projection for us. Let's go over to John on the board. John, what do you got for us? Jake, this is a good night for Nikki Haley. We are now projecting that when all the votes are in, the state of South Carolina, with its 9 electoral votes, will also go into the Haley column. South Carolina also goes into the Haley column, which means she now has 59 electoral votes. Not anywhere near enough to win, of course, but that's enough to really, really jeopardize Donald Trump's hopes for the presidency. Let's go over to our Donald Trump map. This is the most realistic shot Donald Trump has at a victory at the moment. If he can win Virginia, which is only a 50-50 shot at best, if he can win Virginia, we still see him getting the 280 votes. But with South Carolina going to Nikki Haley, look what's happened. He's down to 271 electoral votes. So now he has to win Virginia. He has no choice. He has to win Virginia or he cannot win the presidency. This is no skin off of Joe Biden's beak. Joe Biden, even without South Carolina, Joe Biden still has 283 electoral votes. He can still win this presidency. His path has not been affected so far. But Donald Trump's path has been affected materially. He's now literally hanging on by a single vote, and that vote has to be Virginia. Where are the results in Virginia at the moment? There are the results. As you can see, it's a neck-and-neck battle between Joe Biden, Nikki Haley, and Donald Trump. They're all like 33, 33, 33. We really don't know. What we're waiting now for are returns from the suburbs around D.C. Suburbs around D.C. is not Trump-friendly territory. So whichever way this state goes, it's not looking good for Donald Trump. It looks like it will probably go for either Joe Biden or Nikki Haley. History would indicate it will go for Joe Biden, and Joe Biden's certainly counting on that. If you look at his victory map, there it is. You can see Virginia's 13 electoral votes is in his column. If he loses Virginia, that takes him down to 270. That's still enough to win, but boy, it leaves him literally no margin for error at all. Jake, we now have it. We now have the projection for Virginia. Jake, this is big. The state of Virginia we are now projecting will go. It will go for the. It will go to the former governor of South Carolina and the former UN ambassador, Nikki Haley. So we are now putting Virginia in the Haley column. She now has 72 electoral votes. But look what that does. Look what that does. Here's our Biden map, our minimum Biden victory map. Shows him at 283 at most now. If we give Virginia to Haley, that's Joe Biden, 270 electoral votes. He can still win, but he literally cannot afford to lose a single other state. He can't lose a single other electoral vote, or he cannot win the presidency. But Donald Trump with Virginia's loss is in even worse shape. He's gone from 271 electoral votes to 258. That's not enough. That's not enough, Jake. We may have just witnessed the death of Donald Trump's hopes for the presidency. Because if you look at our current map, let's just take a look here. We'd already scored Alaska. Let's see. We had already scored all of those states. We'd scored Alaska, Arizona, Nevada, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska 2, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. Yeah, we'd already scored all of those. Take a look at our Trump map. As you can see, all of those states are already in our Trump map. So are there any states that have been called which Trump hasn't included in his victory map, which he might conceivably add? Let's see, Nebraska 2. I think Nebraska 2 was in his victory map. Yep, Nebraska 2 is in his victory map, so no help there. Not any others. Iowa was in his victory map. That was in his victory map. North Carolina, no. I think we can call it. Joe Biden might lose this election too. Nikki Haley will probably lose this election too. But Donald Trump will definitely not be the next president of the United States, barring incredible circumstances. He will not be the president of the United States. Or at least, very least, it will be impossible now for him to win the Electoral College. So now we're just waiting for Joe Biden to hang on to that 270 votes. And it really... This is getting interesting, Jake. This is getting really interesting because at this time, we know that Donald Trump cannot win the Electoral College, barring a victory, barring a miracle now. And it now looks as if Joe Biden is the only one who can win the Electoral College. But his hopes are also hanging by a thread. John, let's take a look at this map for a moment. Let's review again. Where are the states where Nikki Haley is really close? Let's see. On the states that haven't been called yet, let's see. So she's close in North Carolina, and she's close in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. She's close in 6 states. So which one of those 6 states are essential to the Biden victory? Good question. Good question, Jake. Let's see. The ones that are essential to the Biden victory. Let's see. He needs to win Pennsylvania. He needs to win Arizona. He needs to win Michigan. And he needs to win Wisconsin. So those are the 4 states. All that has to happen is for Donald Trump or Nikki Haley to win one of those 4 states, and Joe Biden cannot win an Electoral College vote victory either. So at this point, Joe Biden has to be rated as probably the favorite. He will probably win this election, but we could see a path where he's prevented as well. So this is an unusual situation. Thanks, John. That's extraordinary. And let me get back to my panel here. I've got to interrupt you. We have another projection. John, let's go to John on the board. John, what you got for us? Jake, at this time, we are ready to call the state of North Carolina, and we are calling it for, once again, former UN Ambassador and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. With that, she has 88 electoral votes. Again, nowhere near enough to win the election. Joe Biden has 130. Donald Trump has 157. But with the victory of North Carolina, that doesn't affect the Joe Biden victory map. He's still got 270 best case. Still hanging on by his fingernails, but he's still hanging on. But Donald Trump, there's almost no way now that Donald Trump can win because that state was definitely part of any states he wanted to win in order to win. We don't think he can win now. We think he's been deprived of the victory. But with that loss, as you can see, he's down to 242 electoral votes, and we think that's his ceiling. We don't see him getting any more than 242 at this point. And with that also, I think it has to be said that Nikki Haley has now swept the Southeast. Look at that. Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, all fell to the former governor of South Carolina. And we are now looking at a situation where Nikki Haley is, in fact, the most successful independent third-party presidential candidate we've seen since George Wallace. She has won more electoral votes than Ross Perot did, more electoral votes than any other major independent third-party presidential candidate. But it has to be said that at this time, if I were a betting man, if I were a strategist, who would I want to be with at the moment? Would I want to be with Nikki Haley? Would I want to be with Donald Trump? Or would I want to be with Joe Biden? And I have to say, I would want to be with Joe Biden, but boy, he's really got to run the table now. He's absolutely got to run the table. And there are a bunch of states now for which we're still waiting for projections. We're still waiting for projections. A big projection in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is the ball game for Joe Biden. He must win Pennsylvania. He must win Arizona. He must win Michigan. He must win Wisconsin to win the presidency. So that's what we're waiting on now. As you can see, Pennsylvania, it's a neck-and-neck race. It's 33, 33, 33. This is the same pattern we saw in Virginia. This is the same pattern we saw in Georgia. Nikki Haley is making this race a real nail-biter. John, with that victory in the Southeast, so Nikki Haley has effectively become she's always fond of saying that South Carolina became the beast of the Southeast. Well, Nikki Haley is the beast of the Southeast tonight. She has exceeded all expectations and shocked the political world tonight. That's right. She may not win this election. We don't think that she can win it. We don't see a path to an Electoral College victory. But she has certainly made her presence felt. And at the very least, she has cost Donald Trump the presidency. So it will be very interesting to see where Pennsylvania comes on this, which is what we're waiting for next. Thanks, John. Let's get back to our panel now. Good evening. We are now starting the 11 o'clock hour in the East, and there are 6 states that are closing their doors at this time. And it has to be said, we're looking at a really, really interesting presidential race now. It looks like Nikki Haley has spoiled this election for Donald Trump. She has spoiled this election for Donald Trump. She has won not 1, not 2, but 3 states that Donald Trump was counting on to win this election: Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. Actually 4 states, because she also won North Carolina. In addition, she's taken away a state that Joe Biden was expected to win, Virginia. Now, as a result, we don't see that Donald Trump has any path left to the presidency. It looks like Donald Trump has been defeated. He can no longer win in the Electoral College. The same cannot be said for Joe Biden. Joe Biden is hanging by a thread. We see him as still with a path to victory, but that path to victory is, ever so narrow. We see him, at the best, winning 270 electoral votes, exactly as much as he needs to win, but no more than that, and it depends on the outcome of a bunch of swing states, none of which we've called yet. In the meantime, at this hour, 6 states have closed their doors. I think we do have projections for those 6 states, so let's go to John on the board. John, what do you got for us? Jake, 6 states, like you say, just closed their doors. And we're seeing the following states now go for Joe Biden. We're projecting them in the Biden column. That's California, Hawaii, Oregon, and Washington. That's 4 states, pardon me. And then we see 2 states we're projecting in the Trump column, and that's Idaho and North Dakota. So with that, we now see Joe Biden with 208 electoral votes. We see Donald Trump with 164 electoral votes, and Nikki Haley bringing up the rear with 88 electoral votes. None of those results change what we believe to be the only possible path for Joe Biden's victory to 270 votes. Here's the path. As you can see, here are the states which aren't called yet, and there's the Biden path. So if you compare it, we're seeing a bunch of states he has to win. He has to win Arizona, has to win Nevada, he has to win Wisconsin, he has to win Michigan, he has to win Pennsylvania. All of those states have closed their polls, they've closed their doors now. And in all of those states, we're seeing a very close 3-way race between Joe Biden, Nikki Haley, and Donald Trump. So Joe Biden basically has to run the board, but at least his chances are there. They're hanging by a thread, but they're there. That's where matters stand now. Jake, back to you in the panel. I got to interrupt you. John has a very important projection for us. Let's go to John on the board. John, what you got for us? Jake, an extraordinary night just became that much more extraordinary. When all the votes are in, we are now projecting that Nikki Haley will win the state of Pennsylvania. That means that at this time, Joe Biden has 208 electoral votes, Donald Trump has 164 electoral votes, Nikki Haley has 107 electoral votes. But the profound significance of this can easily be missed. Yes, this is a loss for Donald Trump. But we already knew that. Donald Trump, there's no way now he can win an Electoral College victory. But here's the big news. Here's the big news. With the win of Pennsylvania, look at that. Look at that. Joe Biden now has only 251 electoral votes, for sure. His path to winning the presidency through the Electoral College may have closed as well. He's got to now flip one of the uncalled states that wasn't originally thought to be competitive for him. So let's take a look. Probably won't flip Alaska. Nevada and Arizona, they were already in his column. Montana, probably not. South Dakota, probably not. Iowa, maybe. That's a real long shot. Wisconsin was in his map. Michigan was in his map. Boy, I mean, if you flip Iowa for Joe Biden, what happens? If you flip Iowa, what happens? Let's see. No, he doesn't get it. It's still 257. This is extraordinary. Jake, both Joe Biden and Donald Trump have now lost this election. There will be no victor in the Electoral College. This is an extraordinary event. This is a moment in history, Jake. It's time that we just pause and take it in. This is the first time since the early 19th century that we haven't had a winner in the Electoral College. People are going to be pulling out the rule books and checking the Constitution and the whole bit, because now we're in almost uncharted territory. Yes, we've had these elections before, but not in almost. I think it was 1824, so I think it's literally been 2 centuries since the last time we had a situation like this. This is extraordinary. John, let's take a look at the map where we are now. So all these states have not been called yet. Those are the only states that haven't been called. Where's Nikki Haley competitive at the moment? She's competitive in Nevada, Arizona, Nebraska 2, South Dakota, Montana, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So actually, if she were to win all those states, could she? If she won all those states, let's see. That's the map. If she won all those states, that would be 166 electoral votes. That would put her ahead of Trump. That would put her ahead of Donald Trump. But realistically, I think if you look at those states, okay, so let's go back to the current map. If we go to the current map, let's look at the swing states. So it's Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan. So let's say, so that's 25, 35, 36. So that's 40. So that's 42 electoral votes. So let's say, I don't know. Let's say, okay, let's see. So 21, so 6, so 15. So let's say that they split it 50-50. Let's say, for argument's sake, Biden takes Michigan, Nevada, and Trump takes Arizona and Wisconsin. So they split the 42 electoral votes between them. So that's 21-21. So then, so no, at that point, then Haley doesn't get 166 electoral votes. She only gets 124 votes, while Trump gets 185 electoral votes, and Biden gets 229 electoral votes. So none of them get enough to win, but the point is that Biden comes in first, Trump comes in second, Haley comes in third, which means that the election is thrown into the House, Jake, where it hasn't been in 200 years. An extraordinary event. Let's see. So if we figure that Alaska goes, Montana and South Dakota are very close. Haley and Trump are neck and neck in those states as well. All right, but let's assume that Trump wins Montana, South Dakota, Alaska, and Iowa like he's expected to do. Let's assume, like you say, that that Michigan, that Wisconsin and Arizona goes for Trump, that Nevada and Michigan go for Biden. Okay, so let's assume that. Then it gets thrown into the House. And at that point, then the House would have to decide who our next president is. That's an interesting subject for our panel. Thank you, John. Let's get back to our panel. David, have we looked at what happens if this election is thrown into the House? It now looks like this election has indeed been thrown into the House. If it is thrown into the House, what happens? Jake, in the House, each state gets 1 vote. And in the House at the moment, a majority of the House that votes is the new House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is being elected tonight. Now, as you know, a while back, we called the House of Representatives to the Democrats. We believe the Democrats will control the House of Representatives. But what we've been doing over the last hour, as it began to look as if Biden might be deadlocked out of a victory as well, same as Trump, we've been looking at the majority, the partisan majority in each state, because each state only gets one vote. And here's what we see. We see 26 states with a Republican majority. There's a total of 50 states. We see 26 states with a Republican majority, 24 states with a Democratic majority. So if the election is thrown into the House, as now seems very likely, we're looking at a resurrection of Donald Trump's presidential hopes. We're looking at an election which Donald Trump will probably still win, because he will probably win an election in the House. That's extraordinary. So Donald Trump's presidential hopes just zoomed back into existence after having been declared dead for an hour. Basically, yes, he can win in the House as the House looks to be constituted. Now, unless a miracle happens, unless North Carolina goes to Republican, goes to Democrat, but at the moment we're seeing it go to a Republican, so it's seeing it go to a Republican majority. So if that stays, then there will be 26 states, Republican states, voting for Donald Trump. And at this time in the House, it looks like Donald Trump would win that election. That's extraordinary. That's extraordinary. That would be historic. That would be the first president elected in the House since John Quincy Adams in 1824. Is that correct? That's correct. You got to go all the way back to 1824 and John Quincy Adams for a presidential victor in the House of Representatives. Boy, it doesn't. And well, wow. Let's take a moment here. Let's take stock. We've got a bunch of states that we haven't called yet. We haven't called Arizona, Iowa, Michigan, Nebraska, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Montana, and Nevada. So, wow, we know for sure that there won't be an Electoral College victory tonight. So the question now is just, I don't know what the question now is. I guess the question now is, well, we know that Donald Trump would probably win an election in the House. So is it over? Is Donald Trump our next president? Probably at this point, yes, unless something unexpected, something unforeseen occurs. Yeah, Donald Trump will be the next president. He will win in a contingent election in the House because there are a majority of Republican-dominated delegations in the House of Representatives. That's extraordinary. That's extraordinary. We'll be back with our continuing coverage of tonight's historic election after these messages. Don't go away. We've got a bunch of states that we still haven't projected. We still have not projected Arizona, Iowa, Michigan, Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Montana, and Nevada. Stay tuned. We'll be back with our coverage, more of our coverage of this historic presidential election night in just a moment after these messages. Well, it's midnight here on the East Coast. We're about to begin our next hour of coverage of tonight's extraordinary presidential election results. Let's summarize where we are at. Neither Joe Biden nor Donald Trump will win the presidency tonight in the Electoral College. Let me repeat that. Neither Joe Biden nor Donald Trump will win the presidential election tonight in the Electoral College, thanks to a determined effort on the part of Nikki Haley, the most successful independent third-party presidential candidate we've seen actually now since Abraham Lincoln. She has deadlocked the Electoral College. She has blocked both Joe Biden's and Donald Trump's path to a victory in the Electoral College. And at this time, it looks like we are headed for a contingent election in the House of Representatives where Republicans hold the majority of state delegations. They are the majority in the majority of the state delegations. Even though there are more Democratic representatives than Republican representatives, remember, in a House of Representatives contingent presidential election, each state gets only one vote. And at the moment, there are more states with Republican majority delegations in the House than there are states with a Democratic majority in the House. So right now, it looks like Donald Trump is on his way to being elected President of the United States, even though he has not won the popular vote and even though he has not won the Electoral College. Gloria Borger, I think this means that calls for reform of the Electoral College are now going to come hot and heavy. I'm sure this will not sit well with a lot of people. You're not kidding, Jake. This is amazing. We're looking at a situation where a minority of a minority of a minority, if I may say so, gets elected president of the United States. Donald Trump, the majority of the people in this country voted against him. They voted either for Joe Biden or they voted for Nikki Haley. They did not vote for Donald Trump. He didn't even get a plurality of the popular vote. He didn't even get a plurality of the electoral vote at the moment, as matters stand now. And yet he's on his way to becoming the next president of the United States. It's an extraordinary development, and I'm sure it won't sit well with a lot of people. And the calls for reform of the Electoral College are going to come hot and heavy. At this time, let's go over to John King and the board. John, what do you got for us? Well, at this time, the state of Alaska has closed its doors, and we wanted to wait a few minutes to make sure that we weren't looking at a fluke, but apparently we're not. The state of Alaska, with 15% of the vote in, because they count quickly up there, we're seeing a neck-and-neck battle between Nikki Haley and Donald Trump. So it looks like Donald Trump is once again headed for a nail-biter with Nikki Haley. And once again, Nikki Haley is in the hunt. And it's too close to call, so we're not calling that race yet. We do think that we may have projections in a few states in a few minutes. But this has been an incredible night, so stay tuned. We might still be here for a few hours. Back to you, Jake. Back to the panel. Thank you, John. Okay, I've got to interrupt you. We do now have a projection. We have a projection. John, let's go to the board. John, which state are you projecting at this time? Well, it's another victory for Nikki Haley. We believe Nikki Haley will win the state of Iowa. That's another upset. She seems to have gone after a lot of the Trump states where Trump's margin of victory wasn't that large. And she didn't pick off the Utahs, the Idahos, the Wyomings, the Kansases. She didn't pick off any of those states. But boy, she went after the narrow states that were narrowly for Trump the last time. She's gone after the Iowas. She's gone after the Floridas, etc., etc. And now we're putting the state of Iowa in the Haley column. So that means that Biden now has 208 electoral votes, Donald Trump has 164 electoral votes, and Haley has 113 electoral votes. So it's an extraordinary showing. Nikki Haley is not going to win the presidency. We now think that Donald Trump will win the presidency in a contingent election in the House, barring unforeseen circumstances. But it's still an extraordinary showing. Nikki Haley may not win this election, but she has single-handedly prevented either of the major candidates from winning in the Electoral College. But it has to be said, she may have handed this election to Donald Trump. She may have handed it simply by depriving Joe Biden of victory in the states of Virginia and the states of Pennsylvania. She may have single-handedly deprived Joe Biden of the victory and thus have handed Donald Trump the victory through a House contingent election. John, let's take a look. So what states don't remain called at the moment? All the states have closed their doors. We haven't called Alaska, Arizona, Nevada, Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, 2nd Congressional District, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Those are the states that we still haven't called. They're all too close to call. Nevada, Arizona, Nebraska, 2nd District, Wisconsin, and Michigan. They're all freeway races, tight as a drum. In Alaska, we have a tight race between Haley and in Alaska, Montana, South Dakota, we have a tight race between Haley and Trump. So that's why we can't call any of them yet. We don't know which ones we're going to be able to call next. So at this time, we really don't know. We know that Haley's doing well, but we don't know where, if at all, she might win any more states. That's right. She might not win a single other state, but she's already won enough to throw this election in the House. Thank you, John. Well, let's get back to my panel. I'm going to interrupt you. John King has another projection. John, what do you got for us? Well, it's not significant numerically, though it might be significant psychologically. We believe Nikki Haley has yet another another electoral vote on the board. We believe that she will win the 2nd Congressional District of Nebraska. That's the district with Omaha. It was originally thought that Joe Biden would win that election or Donald Trump, but no, that's another tight three-way, and Nikki Haley has again pulled it out. So we believe that she's going to pick up that electoral vote. So at this time, she's got 114 electoral votes. That is easily the strongest showing for any independent third-party presidential candidate since Abraham Lincoln. It's stronger than George Wallace, who was the last record holder in this field. That's interesting. So Donald Trump won the lone congressional district in Maine, and Joe Biden was thought to win the lone congressional district in Nebraska, but he didn't. That's right. So Trump held serve in the lone congressional district in Maine, but Joe Biden didn't succeed in holding serve in Nebraska. He has lost that district to Nikki Haley. So what's left at the moment? So we've got 7 states left to call: Alaska, Arizona, Nevada, Montana, South Dakota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And no matter which way any of those go, neither Joe Biden nor Donald Trump can win this election at the moment, according to our count. It's an impossibility. Let's see. Yeah, because we don't see Alaska, Montana, and South Dakota. Joe Biden is way behind. There's no way he's going to win any of those 3 states. So even if he wins Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, even if he runs that table, he's not going to get it now. The loss of Pennsylvania was fatal for him. Without Pennsylvania, he can't win this election. Extraordinary. Let me get back to my panel. Stand by, stand by. We have another projection. Let's go to John King on the board. John King, what have you got for us? Jake, a few hours ago, this might have been extraordinary, but now this just continues the story. We believe that the state of Wisconsin, when all the votes are in, will also go for Nikki Haley. So she's now up to 124 electoral votes. It's an unprecedented showing for an independent third-party presidential candidate. We knew she was doing well. The opinion polls showed her in the low 30s. We thought that she would be competitive. We thought that she would have some strong showings, but nothing like this. What she's showing is she's winning most of these states. She's winning these in pluralities, 35%, 39%, 37%. But this threshold, this 1/3 threshold, is what she's using to win all these states with a plurality showing. If these states had the 50% plus 1 requirement, or if they had a runoff requirement, she wouldn't have won any of these states. But with presidential elections being decided by plurality victories, that's why Nikki Haley has won all these states. She hasn't made it to 50% in any of them, but she scored up to 38, 39% in most of them, and that's how she's doing it. And she won the state of Wisconsin. And as you can see, she's still in a tight 3-way in Arizona, in Michigan, and in Nevada, and we're still waiting to call those. We don't. Jake, stand by. And we now can call the state of Michigan. We're calling the state of Michigan for Biden. No. Jake, we call the state of Michigan for Nikki Haley. It's an extraordinary development. It means that not only has Nikki Haley done better than any other independent third-party presidential candidate in history except for Abe Lincoln, but she has now broken the blue wall. She has won in all 3 of those blue wall states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. She's broken the blue wall where Donald Trump failed to do so in 2020, and where Joe Biden failed to hold, and where Hillary Clinton failed to hold it in 2016. She has broken that blue wall. She has won the Midwestern states, and with that, she now has 139 electoral votes. Extraordinary, impressive showing. She cannot win this election. Let me repeat. She does not have a mathematical path to win this election. She cannot win this election. But she has had an extraordinarily strong showing, and as a result, she has deadlocked the Electoral College. She has prevented either Joe Biden or Donald Trump from winning an Electoral College victory, and it looks now we're headed for a contingent House of Representatives presidential election, and it looks like Donald Trump will be the victor in that contingent election. So indirectly, indirectly, Nikki Haley appears to have handed the presidency to Donald Trump. It's an ironic ending to a campaign where, if anything, she was more opposed, where she had more harsh things to say about Donald Trump than Joe Biden. But effectively, that's what she's succeeded in doing. So we have no idea now what's happening in the West. Those are the states that haven't been called: Alaska, Arizona, Nevada, Montana, South Dakota. Those are the states which we're still waiting for now, correct? That's correct, Jake. Those are the states we're waiting for. Won't change the outcome of this election. Neither Biden nor Trump will win. This presidential election will go to a House of Representatives contingent election, but it's still interesting to see where these states end up. Thank you. Thank you, John. I'm going to go back to our panel now, discuss these extraordinary developments. Let me interrupt you. We have another projection. Let's go to John on the board. John, what do you got for us? Jake, you're not going to believe this. We have another swing state that we're calling for Nikki Haley, and that is the state of Arizona. So not only did she win in the Southeast, not only did she win in the Midwest, but she also won. Not only did she win the Midwest, she also is winning out West. She's won the state of Arizona with that the 11 electoral votes. So she's now up to 150 electoral votes. Joe Biden is still stuck at 208 electoral votes, and Donald Trump is still stuck at 164 electoral votes. Basically, for the last hour or so, Nikki Haley has run that table. She has run this table. She has won almost every close contests we've seen. She's won. There have been only a few. Actually, I don't think there have been any that were close. I mean, Joe Biden and Donald Trump have won a bunch of states, yes. But the states they won were states where Nikki Haley was not competitive, where she did not campaign, and in many cases where she wasn't even on the ballot. So everywhere where she's competed, she has won. Narrowly, it's a plurality. It's a nail biter. It's a skinnier teeth win, but it's a win nevertheless. So what do we got left now, John? Of the swing states, we just have Nevada. But then we have these three Trump states, or states that were supposed to be Trump: Alaska, Montana, South Dakota. And as you can see, these are all very close. Haley and Trump are tied in Alaska and Montana and South Dakota. And Haley, Trump, and Biden are all tied in Nevada. Joe Biden could still get another state on the map with Nevada, but it looks like that's the only other state where he might get. And that only brings him up to 214, nowhere near enough to win an election, and not enough. And it doesn't matter how much he wins now that the election's going to be thrown into the House where there's a Republican majority. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. Let me get back to my panel. Stand by. John King has another projection. John, we understand you have another projection for us. Let's go to John on the board. John, what you got for us? Well, Jake, in a way, this is a continuation of the same story, but it might be significant. We're now calling the state of South Dakota for Nikki Haley as well, and we don't think it's even going to be that close. In the last 15, 20 minutes, we got a bunch of returns from around urban areas in the state. And Nikki Haley is winning those handily. As a result, she's moved out to a 5 to 6 point lead over Donald Trump as a result. And it looks, when all is said and done, that this state won't even be close. That it will be an easy Nikki Haley win. It's not what was expected. Donald Trump was expected to win this state easily. Democrats didn't even compete in this state. And Donald Trump didn't really compete that strongly in this state either until the last week or so, when it became evident that Nikki Haley was taking the state seriously. But it looks like it was too little too late. Nikki Haley has won the state of South Dakota. John, that could be really important, because right now we're looking at a situation where the Electoral College will not elect the next president. The House of Representatives will elect the next president. Is that correct? It certainly looks like that, Jake. Yes, it does. Well, I'm going to go back to my panel, because let's talk about the state of South Dakota. Because South Dakota, everyone assumed South Dakota would be a Republican state in the House of Representatives and would vote for Donald Trump. But let's get back to here. And David, what is the situation in the House of Representatives with South Dakota? Because if South Dakota, that the House of Representatives only has one representative for South Dakota. So all it takes is for that representative to flip his vote, and suddenly Donald Trump won't be the next president, or at least he won't win the House election, or at least he will lose the vote of South Dakota. Is that correct? And that's correct. And what's really interesting here is that the representative from the state of South Dakota is Dusty Johnson. Dusty Johnson may not be a household word. He's a member of the Problem Solvers. He's a member of the so-called Tuesday Group, now called the Republican Governing Coalition. He's a member of Main Street. So he's not MAGA. He's not Trump. He did endorse Trump, yes, but he endorsed late. He never campaigned with him. And at one point, Donald Trump even tried to get him primaried. So there's no love lost between the two. And with Nikki Haley having won the state of South Dakota, Dusty Johnson's vote may very well be up for grabs. And with South Dakota only having one member in the delegation of the House of Representatives, that's all it would take. That's all it would take to deadlock the election in the House. You realize what you're saying? You're saying that the House might not be able to elect a president either. Well, we're not saying that yet because we don't know what Dusty Johnson is going to do. Well, it would certainly be great to be able to talk to Dusty Johnson. We may try and line him up because this is interesting. We'll be right back after this break with more coverage of this historical presidential election night. Don't go away. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of this historical presidential election night. And we now have on the phone with us the Republican representative from the state of South Dakota, which just went for Nikki Haley. Let's explain the situation. At this time, it looks like neither Joe Biden nor Donald Trump will have enough votes to win the presidency in the Electoral College, so the election will be thrown into the House. By our count, there's one more than half of the states in the House of Representatives who are Republican and will therefore vote for Trump. Each state gets one vote in the House of Representatives. It doesn't go by representative. But one of those Republican states is South Dakota. Not only did Nikki Haley just win South Dakota, but there's only one representative from the state of South Dakota. And all that has to happen is for that representative to respect the will of his constituents, and Donald Trump fails to get the majority he needs to win the election in the House. Congressman Johnson, thank you so much for getting on the phone with us. What's your comment on the results in your home state, first of all? Well, I take my hat off to Governor Haley. I mean, I've always admired her. I've always liked her. I've always thought that she was one of the stars in our party. I've always respected her. And so I congratulate her. She campaigned well. She was a strong candidate, and she deserves this, and I congratulate her. What about you, Congressman Johnson? It now looks as if the House of Representatives will be the body to decide who our next president is. So you will be the lone vote representing the state of South Dakota. Have you decided what you will do? You endorse Donald Trump. You are a Republican. Will you vote the state of South Dakota's vote? Will you cast the state of South Dakota's vote for Donald Trump when the contingent election happens on January 3rd? Jake, I have to tell you that at this time, I'm not prepared to say what I'm going to do. I will certainly pray over it. I have to think about this long and hard. I have to respect the wishes of my constituents, recognize those wishes, and I also have to realize that I am a Republican. I did support and endorse Donald Trump, and I still think that he would be the best choice for president this year. But on the other hand, I have to understand that my constituents are leaning in a different direction. So this is an age-old conundrum that faces a lot of elected representatives. Do they vote their conscience, or do they vote their constituents' wishes? And I'm going to have to think about this long and hard. I'm going to have to decide, can I justify going against the wishes of my constituents? Can I justify basically discounting their votes? And I'd be very troubled at the thought of doing that. But on the other hand, I have endorsed Donald Trump, and I did vote for Donald Trump, and I am a Republican. So this is not going to be an easy decision for me, but I can tell you I will pray over it, and I can also tell you that I have not decided what I will do. But I will certainly, I won't keep you all in suspense. I mean, I don't think that would be good for the country. I will certainly let the country know my decision in short order. How soon, Congressman, can we expect your decision in that regard? I think I'm probably going to have to, I think you'll probably hear from me before the end of the week. I will let everyone know what my intentions are. Congressman Johnson, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate the time, particularly at this late hour. No problem, Jake. Good to be with you. Well, so that happened. That's extraordinary. Gloria, your take? My take? Well, this may still not mean much because we know that Republicans won. We know Republicans won the Senate back tonight. And the Republican Senate, if the House of Representatives is deadlocked, then the Republican Senate gets to choose the vice president. So the vice president will become the acting president if the House is deadlocked. And with a majority of Republican Senate, they will probably vote for Kristi Noem, Donald Trump's vice presidential candidate. So I think now it looks like the next president will either be Donald Trump or Kristi Noem. And of course Noem will probably name as her vice president Donald Trump. And then she will probably resign, Donald Trump will become president, Trump will name Noem as his vice president, the Senate will approve, the Republican Senate will approve, and there you go. So it may not actually make that much difference in the long run, but it certainly throws a huge wrinkle into this process, because if Congressman Johnson really abstains the state of South Dakota in the vote, and remember the rules. The rules are that the winning candidate in the House of Representatives in the presidential contingent election, the winning candidate has to get a majority of all the states. He can't just get a majority of the voting states. So if the vote is 25-24, that's not enough. He needs to get 26 votes. So if Congressman Johnson withholds the vote of South Dakota, that's it. No one is elected in the House. Curiouser and curiouser. So Kristi Noem could be our next president. Yes, Kristi Noem could be our next president, definitely. It's extraordinary. Please stay tuned for more of our coverage of tonight's historic presidential election. We'll be back in a few minutes. We've got another projection. Stand by. Let's go to John on the board. John, what you got? Well, it looks like Nikki Haley's efforts in the Northwest, in both South Dakota and Montana, paid off. We're seeing that Nikki Haley will probably win the state of Montana as well. So look at that. You can see basically it's a border strategy. She won the Southeast. She won the Canadians. She won the Midwestern states on the Canadian border. And she won Iowa, South Dakota, and Montana, also in the north. Notice there's this huge swath in the middle of the country: Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, Connecticut, Tennessee, Mississippi. That entire area, which is Trump country. And then you have, and the centers for Joe Biden and the Democrats is the West Coast and the Northeast: New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, and so on, and Washington, Oregon, and California. So you can see that there is sort of a geographical tinge to this, but Nikki Haley is the only candidate who seems to be playing about equally well across the country. And we are seeing that happen in Montana as well. Thank you, John. Let me get back to my panel. Stand by for a projection. We now have the last swing state, Nevada. John, you have the projection on Nevada. Is that correct? That's correct. And at this point, it probably shouldn't be that much of a surprise to us. Nikki Haley will win the state of Nevada. She won it barely. She won it with 34% of the vote. Look at that narrow margin. But we just got an whole influx of votes from Las Vegas. We don't see anywhere where either Joe Biden or Donald Trump can make that up. So we are calling the state of Nevada for Nikki Haley. So at this time, we see Joe Biden with 208 electoral votes. We see Donald Trump with 164 electoral votes. And look at that. Nikki Haley, 163 electoral votes. So she almost caught Donald Trump. Not quite, but almost. It's an extraordinary showing. Wow. So that leaves just Alaska. As you can see, we're not calling Alaska yet. At the moment, as you can see, Donald Trump is leading Nikki Haley by about 4 percentage points. We haven't got some returns, however, in from Fairbanks, which is what we're waiting for. They're usually the last to count because they have way more votes than the rest of the state. So we're waiting on that. But at the moment, that's what we see. At the moment, though, I mean, Alaska was always thought to be Trump, and if this state goes for Trump, it won't be that big of a surprise. But as I said, we're not quite ready to call it yet, so we'll wait, we'll see what happens. Thanks, John. Let me get back to my panel. Stand by, stand by. John King. John King has some news for us. Let's go to John King and the board. John, what you got for us? Jake, we've got a projection in the last state remaining to be called. We did just get a whole bunch of votes in from Fairbanks. We believe there's no place Donald Trump can now go for more votes. It put Nikki Haley squarely in the lead in Alaska by about 3 points. And incredibly, historically, we are putting the state of Alaska in Nikki Haley's column. And look at that number. So we now have Joe Biden with 208 electoral votes. We have Donald Trump with 164 electoral votes. And look at that number for Nikki Haley, 166 electoral votes. She gets more electoral votes than Donald Trump. It's an extraordinary performance. It doesn't change anything. The House is still Republican. They would still probably vote for Donald Trump unless Dusty Johnson goes along with his constituents. But it still is an extraordinary showing. Jake? Yes, David. Go ahead, David. Jake, I think it needs to be pointed out that if Dusty Johnson abstains and there is no victor in the House, and then it goes into a Republican Senate, that's right, David. So the Republican Senate would vote for Kristi Noem. No, that's not right, Jake. We just looked it up. The Senate, in its vote for vice president, is only allowed to vote between the top 2 finishers. Look at the figures. Nikki Haley has come out on top of Donald Trump. So that means that the Republican majority Senate will not be able to vote. Will not be able to vote for Kristi Noem for the vice presidency. They're going to have to make a choice between Joe Biden's Kamala Harris and Nikki Haley's Kyrsten Sinema. So how would they vote? That is extraordinary. So wait, are you saying, yes, with the win in Alaska, Nikki Haley appears to have prevented Donald Trump or Kristi Noem from ever becoming president? Because they can now because if the House deadlocks, then the Senate will only be able to vote between Kyrsten Sinema and Kamala Harris. They will not be able to cast a vote for Kristi Noem. So how would a Republican majority Senate vote? How would they vote in a choice between Sinema and Harris? Oh, I guess it's obvious. They wouldn't vote for Kamala Harris. So they must vote between the top 2 finishers. So they would have to vote for Kyrsten Sinema. Yes, they would have to vote for Sinema. And this means that now that we've projected all the states, we now know what the Electoral College count will be. It'll be Joe Biden, 208. It'll be Nikki Haley, 166. It'll be Donald Trump, 164. So all eyes now are on Congressman Johnson. Will Congressman Johnson abstain? Will he vote for Donald Trump? Or will he vote for Nikki Haley? And nobody knows, and he's going to let us know. If he decides to abstain, then our next president will probably be Kyrsten Sinema. If he decides not to abstain and vote for Haley, then our next president will be Kyrsten Sinema again, because that's not enough votes to make Haley the president, or Trump the president, or Biden the president in the House. And of course, if he chooses to vote for Trump, then Trump is the next president. So it's all dependent on Congressman Johnson now. It's up to Johnson now to decide whether our next president is Donald Trump or Kyrsten Sinema. And we do not know which way he's going to go. And he says he doesn't know himself. So tonight's presidential election has ended on a gigantic question mark. It's an extraordinary finish to an extraordinary campaign. Dana, Gloria, Van, David, Scott, Alyssa, some final thoughts. Whoever wants to opine. Dana? Well, obviously this is an extraordinary situation. But I think if we look at that map, we begin to see what's going on here. How will history view this? What will history say? And I think history will say that the two parties were becoming hollowed out from within. The edifice was becoming more fragile and more fragile and more fragile. And finally, somebody came along and gave it a knock in just the right place and the whole thing came crashing down. And the person who came along and gave it a knock was Nikki Haley and Kyrsten Sinema. And as you can see, in one fell swoop, they've basically destroyed the two parties, at least at the presidential level. They've destroyed the consensus, and they've left us in a real question mark, not knowing where this is going to go from there. Is Nikki Haley's victory the harbinger of a third party, maybe a party that will take the place of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party? Or is it going to be a new party that holds an uneasy coexistence with the Democratic and Republican Party? Are we moving into a three-party system? Or is it just a fluke? Will it be like Laura Weicker? Haley will win, Haley or Sinema will win one term or two terms, and then we'll go back to the Democrats and Republicans. I mean, the jury's out, but this is an incredible development. This certainly is the most important and significant political development that we've seen in this country since the collapse of the Whigs and the advent of the Republican Party in the 19th century. This is the first major sea change we've had in political alignment of this order we've had in 2 centuries. Gloria, what are your thoughts? First of all, I'm thinking that the Democratic and Republican parties, they both screwed up. This should not have happened. This, more than in some ways, is a dramatic demonstration of the tragic error they committed in insisting on staying with Joe Biden and Donald Trump as their candidates. And Nikki Haley spotted the weakness, 2 80-year-old candidates, and she went at it with an unerring and relentless bullseye. It was a vulnerability. It was a self-owned goal that the Democrats and Republicans committed on themselves, and they have no one to blame but themselves, I don't think. It was an error. It was an unforced error. They shot themselves in the foot, and this is the result. And it just goes to show you, at some point, if you continually market something that doesn't fit the audience, eventually it'll catch up to you. Eventually you will rue the day. Eventually you will regret it. And tonight was the night that they may have regretted it. Look, it may be too soon to say that. Donald Trump may still win this election. Dusty Johnson may still decide to go with his party loyalty and with his own professed endorsement of Donald Trump. But if he doesn't, then that's what we're seeing. We're seeing monumental error on the part of the Democratic and Republican Party, and those errors turning around and biting them when it really counted. And that's my thoughts. Jake, if I may say one thing also I think that bears repeating. Yeah, sure, David, go ahead. I think we have to acknowledge that Nikki Haley's strategy here was truly ingenious. She figured out how to deadlock the Electoral College. She figured out how to do it in a manner that prevented either Joe Biden or Donald Trump from being elected president in the Electoral College. And then she did the final masterstroke of winning a few small Trump states like Alaska, like South Dakota, like Montana. No one was looking, no one was contesting, no one was competing in those states, and she just grabbed them. And it's now clear why she did that. She grabbed them because she was hoping to deadlock the House. She must have been betting that the Senate would be Republican. She must have keyed her strategy towards making sure that Donald Trump came in third. And it worked. It was almost an inside straight, but it worked. We now have a situation where it looks like if South Dakota goes with Haley or abstains, then Kyrsten Sinema will become the acting president. She will name Nikki Haley as her vice president. The Senate will approve. Sinema will resign. Haley will be sworn in as president. We'll name Sinema as a vice president. The Senate will approve. And there you go. It's an extraordinary conclusion. And I think we have to give Nikki Haley credit. It was an incredible strategy. It was a daring, out-of-the-box strategy. No one ever thought of it. And it looks like it worked. Thank you all. It's been an extraordinary evening. At this point, I guess we might as well sign off. The next major development in this won't come in the terms of election returns. It won't come in terms of the Electoral College. The Electoral College has now done its job. It'll come in the form of a little-known congressman from the small state of South Dakota who may hold the fate of the White House in his hands and from whom we are expected to hear within days. Thank you all for your attention at the end of what has been a truly extraordinary, incredible, and historical night. Thank you all for watching. I'm Jake Tappert. The news continues.